This story is titled, Parents Bought a House for Brother from Retirement Money I Saved for Them. I cut them off financially, and now they are begging. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I, 33 female, never thought I'd be the type of person writing a Reddit post about family drama, but here I am at 2 a.m., stress-eating leftover Chinese food, and trying to make sense of how my life turned into this absolute dumpster fire. Fair warning, this is going to be a long one, and buckle up because this story is wild from start to finish. First, let me paint you a picture of where I'm coming from. I'm a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in Cleveland, not one of those Silicon Valley giants, but decent enough that I can afford a nice condo and don't have to stress about buying name-brand cereals. I've always been the nerdy one in the family. You know, the kid who built her first computer at 13 and thought debugging code was more fun than going to high school parties. Not that I was totally antisocial or anything. I just had different priorities than most kids my age. Growing up, we were your typical middle-class Midwestern family. Dad worked his tail off in construction for 30-plus years, coming home every day with a new story about some crazy thing that happened on the job site. His hands permanently calloused from decades of hard work. Mom taught third grade at the local elementary school, the kind of teacher who'd spend her own money on classroom supplies and knew every student's birthday by heart. We lived in this modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. Nothing fancy, but it was home. Then there's my brother Jake, 29 male, the golden child extraordinaire. I swear this kid could have set the house on fire, and my parents would have found a way to blame it on the matches being too flammable. From day one, it was like we were living in parallel universes. While I was expected to maintain straight A's, help with household chores, and basically act like a third parent, Jake got away with literally everything. Let me give you some examples because I know this probably sounds like I'm exaggerating. I wish I was. When I was 16, I got my first job at the local library shelving books. I had to save up for 6 months to buy my first laptop for coding projects. Meanwhile, Jake would casually mention wanting the latest Xbox. And bam! Next thing you know, it's under the Christmas tree. When I needed new glasses, had to wait 3 months until Dad's vision insurance kicked in. But when Jake decided he wanted contact lenses because glasses weren't cool, Mom dipped into their savings, no questions asked. The really frustrating part? Jake isn't a bad person, not really. He can actually be pretty charming when he wants to be. That classic, life-of-the-party type who always knows the right joke to tell. But he's never had to face consequences for anything in his life, and that's turned him into this entitled man-child who thinks the world owes him everything on a silver platter. College was when the differences in how we were treated became impossible to ignore. I got accepted into State University's computer science program. Not MIT or Stanford, but a solid program with good job placement rates. I was over the moon, right? Until my parents sat me down for the talk. Apparently, they couldn't help with tuition because they were saving for Jake's future. I took out loans, worked 2 part-time jobs, one at the campus IT help desk and another doing freelance web design, and basically lived on ramen and coffee for 4 years. Meanwhile, Jake bounced around 3 different community colleges, never staying more than a semester at each one because he hadn't found his passion yet. Each time, my parents paid his tuition in full, bought his books, and even gave him spending money for the full college experience. He finally dropped out completely after his 4th attempt, declaring that college isn't for everyone and that he was going to make it big in sales. I know what you're probably thinking. Why didn't I say anything? Trust me, I tried. Every time I brought up the obvious favoritism, I got shut down with phrases like, "You're just more independent," or "Jake needs extra support," or my personal favorite, "You're the older sister, you should understand." Eventually, I just stopped bringing it up. It was easier to focus on my own goals than bang my head against that particular wall. So there I was, fresh out of college, finally landing my first real programming job at a startup. 60-hour weeks, but hey, at least I had health insurance. Jake was, well, Jake was living his best life bouncing between random sales jobs and still living in our parents' basement. But then everything changed when he met Sarah. Picture this. It's 2016, and I'm home for Dad's birthday dinner. Jake shows up 2 hours late, bursting through the door like he just discovered the cure for cancer. Everyone, I met someone. Now, Jake had met someone approximately 47 times before, so I barely looked up from my mashed potatoes. But this time was different. Because in walks, this woman wearing what I can only describe as Instagram model goes to Walmart. Sarah, then 23 female, was, how do I put this diplomatically? Remember that girl in high school who peaked at 16 and never quite got over it? That's Sarah. She had this thing where she'd talk about her personal brand and her upcoming influencer career while having maybe 500 followers on Instagram. But the way she carried herself, you'd think she was one step away from getting verified on every social platform known to mankind. The first words out of her mouth, and I swear on my collection of Star Wars Funko Pops this is true, were, OMG, your house is so cozy. It's like totally giving me vintage vibes. My mom's pride and joy, her carefully decorated living room that she'd spent years perfecting, just got called vintage, like it was some kind of thrift store find. Mom's face did this thing where she was trying to smile, but looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon soaked in vinegar. But here's the real kicker. Within 3 months, yes, you read that right, Jake announces they're engaged. No ring, because apparently they were saving up for something special. Translation? They were waiting for my parents to fund the whole thing. My mom, bless her heart, immediately started talking about dipping into their retirement fund for the perfect wedding. I tried to voice some concerns. You know, crazy things like maybe they should date for more than 90 days, and shouldn't they both have stable jobs first? But I got shut down faster than Internet Explorer. Sarah, meanwhile, had already created a wedding Pinterest board with 3,000 plus pins. Not exaggerating. She had specific requirements for everything, from the exact shade of rose gold for the table settings to the precise height of the centerpiece flowers. Remember, this is a woman who worked part-time at Sephora and lived with 3 roommates, but she was planning a wedding that would make the Kardashians say, maybe tone it down a bit. The worst part? Sarah started this passive-aggressive campaign against me almost immediately. She'd make these little comments at family dinners like, it's so brave of you to focus on your career instead of finding love. Or, don't worry, some men actually like independent women, said in that sugary sweet tone that makes you want to commit crimes. One time, she actually patted my hand and said, at least you'll always have your computers. The audacity of this woman could power a small city. My parents naturally thought she was delightful, and just what Jake needed. They ate up her act like it was the last piece of chocolate cake on earth. When she'd make those backhanded comments about my single status or my career, they'd just laugh it off with, oh, that's just Sarah being Sarah. Like being consistently rude was some sort of quirky personality trait. The engagement party was a preview of the nightmare to come. Sarah insisted on having it at this super expensive restaurant downtown, complete with a champagne fountain, because apparently regular champagne glasses weren't fancy enough. Jake, who was between jobs again, couldn't contribute a dime. Want to guess who ended up footing the bill? Yep, my parents took out a loan. A loan for an engagement party. I remember sitting there, watching Sarah hold court like some discount royalty, thinking this cannot possibly get worse. Oh, sweet summer child. Past me had no idea what was coming. The engagement party was just the appetizer in this 5-course meal of chaos. That night, my mom pulled me aside and asked if I'd consider being a bridesmaid. Before I could answer, Sarah swooped in and said, oh, don't worry about it. I wouldn't want to stress you out with all the dress fittings and parties. Plus, the bridesmaid dresses might not come in your size. I wear a size 8. The dresses came in up to size 24. But sure, Sarah, tell me more about how you're just looking out for me. Sarah transformed into the final boss of Bridezillas. She literally, and I mean literally, made a PowerPoint presentation for my parents about why they needed to spend at least $50,000 on her dream wedding. Her reasoning? Jake and I are going to be influencers, and these photos will launch our brand. I wish I was making this up. The venue she picked was this ridiculous historic mansion an hour outside Cleveland that costs more per hour than I made in a week at my first programming job. When my mom gently suggested something more affordable, Sarah burst into tears and said, but I've already announced it on Instagram. I can't disappoint my followers. Those mysterious followers must have been invisible, because last time I checked, her most popular post was a blurry photo of her Starbucks drink with 43 likes. Now here's where things get really wild. My parents, who had been telling me for years that they were carefully saving for retirement, suddenly revealed they had a special occasion fund they'd been building up. Plot twist. It was their actual retirement savings. They emptied their 401k, paid the early withdrawal penalties, and took out a second mortgage on their house. All for one single day. The dress saga deserves its own paragraph. Sarah didn't just buy a wedding dress, she bought 4. Yes, you read that right. One for the ceremony, one for the reception, one for the sunset photos, and one for the exit. Each dress cost more than my first car. When I pointed out that she'd only wear each dress for a few hours, she looked at me like I'd suggested she get married in a trash bag and said, "Well, some of us care about creating magical moments." This from someone who still had an outstanding balance on her Forever 21 credit card. The day of the wedding was like watching a slow-motion train wreck while being forced to wear a hideous dress that Sarah definitely picked to make all the bridesmaids look bad. Oh yeah, she eventually made me a bridesmaid after my mom threw a fit, but I was stationed at the very end of the line, behind Sarah's second cousin's roommate's sister, who she'd met exactly once. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong, but in the most expensive way possible. The luxury caterer served raw chicken, the DJ played the wrong first dance song, and the professional photographer, who turned out to be one of Sarah's Instagram mutuals trying to build her portfolio, somehow managed to blur almost every single photo. But Sarah's reaction to these disasters was what really took the cake. Instead of dealing with the problems, she had a full-on meltdown during the reception. I'm talking mascara running, fake tan streaking, full "this is the worst day of my life" screaming match with the wedding planner. Jake just stood there looking lost, probably wondering if he could sneak out for a smoke and never come back. My parents spent the whole time running around trying to fix everything, while I sat at my table stress-eating wedding cake and wondering if anyone would notice if I ordered a pizza. The real gut punch came at the end of the night when I overheard my dad talking to the venue manager about putting the final balance on his credit card because the check they'd written bounced. My mom was in the bathroom crying because they'd just gotten a text that their mortgage payment had been declined. Meanwhile, Sarah was complaining that the lighting wasn't optimal for her Instagram stories. But here's the kicker, and this still makes my blood boil when I think about it. During the father-daughter dance, Sarah looked right at me and said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "It must be so hard for you to watch this, knowing you might never have a wedding of your own. But don't worry, you can live vicariously through my perfect day." I had to physically restrain myself from pushing her into the chocolate fountain. The next day, while everyone was dealing with their hangovers and regrets, Sarah announced she was taking a break from social media because the wedding photos weren't aesthetic enough for her feed. My parents were left with $78,000 in debt. Yes, you read that number right. And Jake and Sarah had the audacity to complain that they didn't get enough gift cards to complete their home furnishing wish list. I tried to talk to my parents about their financial situation after the wedding, but they kept insisting everything was fine. "We'll figure it out," my mom said, while cutting coupons for the first time in her life. At least Jake is happy. But was he? Every time I saw him after the wedding, he looked like a man who just realized he'd signed up for a lifetime subscription to chaos, with no refund policy. Little did I know, this wedding was just the warm-up act. The real show was about to begin. And let me tell you, it makes this $78,000 disaster look like a budget backyard barbecue. After the wedding disaster, I threw myself into my career like it was the last season of my favorite Netflix show. The startup I was working for got acquired by a bigger tech company, and suddenly my stock options were worth actual money instead of just hopes and dreams. I'm not talking buy a yacht money, but definitely, maybe I can finally pay off these student loans money. The acquisition meant I got promoted to lead developer, which came with a pretty sweet salary bump. I finally moved out of my shoebox apartment, you know, the one where the bathroom door couldn't fully open because it hit the toilet, and bought a condo in a decent part of town. Nothing fancy, but it has in-unit laundry and a balcony big enough for some plants, which basically makes it a mansion by millennial standards. Meanwhile, Jake and Sarah's influencer empire was going about as well as you'd expect. Sarah had upgraded from posting blurry Starbucks photos to posting blurry photos of their dinners at Olive Garden, but her follower count was still hovering around 800, half of which were definitely bots. Jake kept jumping between sales jobs, always with the same pattern. Start strong, make big promises about becoming top seller, then either quit or get fired within 3 months because the company didn't align with his values. Translation, they expected him to actually work. Here's where things get complicated. Remember how my parents drained their savings and took out loans for the wedding? Well, the bills started coming due. My dad's construction work was getting harder on his body. 30-plus years of heavy lifting will do that to you. He started having serious back problems, and their health insurance didn't cover most of the treatments he needed. Mom was still teaching, but her salary barely covered their regular expenses, let alone the mountain of debt they'd accumulated. One night, my mom called me in tears. Dad's back had gotten so bad he couldn't work anymore, and they were 3 months behind on their second mortgage. Without thinking twice, I set up automatic payments to help them cover their bills. I even created a separate retirement account for them, putting away about $2,000 each month. It wasn't easy. I had to cut back on my own expenses and say goodbye to my dreams of getting a Tesla, stuck with my reliable but decidedly unsexy Hyundai. But they're my parents. What else could I do? Sarah's reaction to all this? She started making these snide TikToks about toxic productivity and how some people think money is more important than family time. This from the woman who once tried to start a GoFundMe to buy herself a Gucci bag because it would help her brand. The audacity of this woman could power a small country. Things got even more bizarre when Jake and Sarah announced they were expecting their first kid. Instead of, preparing financially for parenthood, they decided this was the perfect time to start a family lifestyle blog. They actually asked me to build them a website for free because exposure is better than payment, and I'm just sitting at a computer all day anyway. When I suggested they use Squarespace instead, Sarah cried to my parents about how I never support their dreams. By the time their second kid came along, yes, they decided one wasn't enough. They were living in this sketchy apartment complex where the elevator had been temporarily out of order since Obama's first term. Sarah kept posting these weirdly filtered photos, trying to make it look like some kind of bohemian paradise, with captions like, living that authentic life, and you don't need luxury to be rich in love. But behind the scenes, they were constantly asking my parents for money. The real kicker? Every time I achieved something, promotion, condo purchase, maxing out my 401k, they'd find a way to make it about them. When I got an award at work for leading a major project, Sarah posted this long Instagram rant about how career women are missing out on life's true purpose. When I bought my condo, Jake told our parents it wasn't fair that I had so much extra money while his kids had to share a room. I tried to help them too, in practical ways. I offered to teach Jake basic coding so he could maybe get into tech sales. Better job security. I sent Sarah resources about actual social media marketing careers. I even offered to pay for financial planning sessions. But nothing stuck. They were too busy building their brand to actually build their future. Then came the ask. It started with a phone call at 3 a.m. You know those calls that make your stomach drop before you even answer? Yeah, it was one of those. I fumbled for my phone, thinking it must be an emergency, only to hear Sarah's overly excited voice. OMG, you'll never believe it. We're pregnant again, with number 3. Isn't that amazeballs? I mumbled some congratulations while mentally calculating how many more times they'd ask my parents for emergency money with another kid in the mix. But Sarah wasn't done. She launched into this whole speech about how they'd been manifesting their dream home, her actual words, and had found this perfect house in Maple Heights, the fancy part of town where houses start at $500,000. So here's the thing, she chirped, like she was about to ask to borrow a sweater instead of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We need you to buy it for us. Mom and Dad think it's a great idea. I literally had to put the phone on mute for a second to laugh hysterically into my pillow. When I got my composure back, I tried to let her down gently. Sarah, I can't afford to buy you guys a house. I'm already helping Mom and Dad with their bills. Her response? But you make so much money just playing with computers all day. And we need this house. Our apartment isn't safe for the kids anymore. Did you know our neighbor has a motorcycle? A motorcycle. What kind of environment is that for children? The next day, my parents invited me over for dinner. I should have known something was up when Mom made my favorite lasagna. She only breaks out the fancy recipe when she's about to drop a bomb. Sure enough, halfway through dinner, they started their tag team guilt trip about the house. Honey, Mom started, pushing the garlic bread toward me like carbs could soften the blow. We know you're good with money, and Jake and Sarah really need this. The kids deserve a better neighborhood. Dad jumped in. You know, when I was your age, family helped family. Your uncle helped me buy our first house. Fact check. Uncle Bob loaned them $5,000 in 1985. Not exactly the same as buying a $500,000 house in 2025. I tried explaining that I couldn't afford it. I had my own future to think about. My own potential family someday. But they weren't listening. They'd already decided I was being selfish. The dinner ended with me leaving early, my mom crying, and my dad giving me that disappointed look he usually reserved for when Jake lost another job. But here's where it gets really wild. A month later, I was doing my monthly budget check. Yes, I'm that person. I have spreadsheets for my spreadsheets. I logged into the retirement account I'd set up for my parents, the one I'd been faithfully putting $2,000 into every month for years. Balance: $0.00. I literally spit out my coffee, called my bank thinking there must be some mistake. Nope. The money was gone. All $175,000 of it. Years of careful saving vanished. Called my mom in a panic, thinking they'd been scammed. She gave me this whole song and dance about lending it to my aunt for medical bills. But something felt off. Called my aunt. Surprise. She had no idea what I was talking about. Finally confronted my parents in person. Mom broke down crying. She does that a lot, have you noticed? And admitted they'd given the money to Jake and Sarah for a down payment on their dream house. Let me repeat that. They took the money I had saved for their retirement and gave it to my brother for a house he couldn't afford. I lost it. Like, completely lost it. Are you out of your minds? I screamed. That was your retirement money. What are you going to live on? Social Security? Dad's back is getting worse, your medical bills are increasing, and you just gave away your safety net. Their response? Dad actually had the audacity to say, well, we had to do this because you refused to help. You can abandon your brother, but we can't turn away from our son. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. These people had watched me scrimp and save for years to build them a retirement fund. They'd seen me drive an old car, live in a modest condo, skip vacations, all so they'd be secure in their old age. And they just gave it away to Jake and Sarah, who had never shown an ounce of financial responsibility in their lives. Mom tried to calm me down, saying they had no choice because Jake and Sarah needed the house for the children. She even tried to guilt me by saying, "You're single. You don't understand what it's like to have kids." I stormed out, but not before delivering my ultimatum. Either they get the money back, or I'm done. No more monthly support, no more paying their bills, no more bailing them out. They chose Jake over me one too many times. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and you're screaming at the characters not to go into the dark basement? But they do it anyway? That's basically how I felt watching the next few months unfold. After I cut off financial support to my parents, Sarah posted this long Instagram rant about how some people think money is more important than family, and how they would step up and take care of the family since others had abandoned their responsibilities. The post got 34 likes, including one from her mom and 3 from her alternate accounts. At first, they actually seemed to be making it work, or at least that's what it looked like on social media. Sarah was posting daily updates about their blessed life in their new house, complete with perfectly staged photos of their morning routine, which apparently involved drinking coffee on their fancy new front porch while wearing matching pajamas. She even started a YouTube channel called Living Our Best Life with the Williamsons, which peaked at 127 subscribers. But you can only filter reality so much before it starts showing through the cracks. The first sign of trouble came when Jake lost his latest sales job, something about restructuring. But knowing Jake, it was probably because he spent more time helping Sarah film TikToks than actually selling anything. Sarah tried to spin this as a blessing in disguise, because now Jake could be her full-time content manager. I'm not making this up. She literally expected them to live off her non-existent influencer income while raising 3 kids and paying a mortgage. My parents, meanwhile, were trying to put on a brave face, but I could see them struggling. Mom started selling her beloved antique collection piece by piece on Facebook Marketplace. Dad's back got worse, but they couldn't afford his physical therapy anymore. They kept insisting everything was fine, that Jake and Sarah were helping out, but their utilities got shut off twice in 1 month. I found this out from our neighbor Mrs. Peterson, who let them run an extension cord to her house so their food wouldn't spoil. Yeah, it was that bad. About 4 months in, the wheels really started coming off. Sarah's Instagram stories switched from morning routine posts to long, teary rants about haters and negative energy after people started calling out her obviously fake lifestyle. Their perfect new house started looking less perfect. The lawn wasn't being mowed, Amazon packages stopped showing up daily, and their fancy SUV disappeared from the driveway. Later found out it got repossessed. Then came the credit card debt revelation. Turns out they'd been maxing out cards left and right, trying to maintain their influencer lifestyle. We're talking multiple cards all maxed out. Sarah had apparently convinced Jake that they needed to invest in their brand by buying things like a $2,000 camera, ring lights, a podcast microphone setup. They recorded exactly 2 episodes of a podcast called Manifesting Your Best Life Before Giving Up, and countless props for their social media posts. The breaking point came when my parents finally grew a spine and demanded Jake and Sarah start paying them the monthly allowance they'd promised. Sarah actually laughed in their face and said, "We're investing in our future right now. Once we hit 10,000 followers, we'll be making enough to support everyone." This from a woman who couldn't even get 50 likes on a post unless she bought them. I got a call from Mom at 2 a.m. one night. She was crying. Shocking, I know, because their electricity had been shut off again, and this time Mrs. Peterson was out of town, so they couldn't even run an extension cord. Dad's medication needed to be refrigerated. I'll admit I almost broke and helped them, but then Mom said something that turned my heart to stone. If you had just bought Jake and Sarah the house in the first place, none of this would have happened. That's when I realized nothing had changed. They were still blaming me for their problems, still enabling Jake and Sarah's delusions, still refusing to accept reality. So I stayed strong and suggested they ask their precious son for help instead. Want to know what Jake and Sarah's response was when my parents went to them desperate for help? Sarah literally filmed their interaction for her Instagram stories, painting herself as the victim of toxic family members who only want handouts. She ended the video with a promo code for some sketchy weight loss tea. The video got 89 views. But it all hit rock bottom on one Tuesday morning. Mrs. Peterson, actual saint of a neighbor, called me in a panic. She'd gone to check on my parents and noticed a moving truck at Jake and Sarah's house at 4 a.m. Not the normal kind of moving truck either. We're talking one of those sketchy rental vans that definitely had seen better days. When my parents went over to investigate later that morning, the house was completely empty. Like, not just moved out empty. We're talking took every single light bulb and cabinet handle empty. Sarah's precious ring light setup? Gone. The kids' toys? Gone. Even the fancy doorbell camera they'd insisted was essential for their home security content series had been ripped off the wall. But here's the real kicker. They didn't just disappear with their own stuff. They somehow managed to get their hands on my parents' emergency credit card, the one Mom kept just in case, and maxed it out with a $5,000 cash advance the day before they left. Mom had given them the card to buy groceries when they were struggling last month. I guess in their minds, disappearing in the middle of the night counts as an emergency. The realtor who showed up the next day dropped the next bomb. Jake and Sarah had listed the house for sale 3 weeks earlier. They'd already accepted an offer and were just waiting for closing. They'd managed to keep this secret from everyone, probably because they'd blocked the entire family on social media after their last big fight with my parents about money. Want to guess what they did with the sale money? Because it gets better, or worse, depending on how you look at it. They not only pocketed the down payment my parents had given them, my retirement savings, but they also somehow convinced the buyers to pay in cash and wire the money directly to their account instead of going through the proper channels. The real estate agent was furious. Apparently, they'd spun some story about needing the money quickly for a family medical emergency. She only found out about the sketchy deal when she showed up to do the final walkthrough and found the house abandoned. The buyers are now threatening to sue everyone involved, which is just the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday. My parents were devastated, obviously. Not just because their golden child had screwed them over again, but because they'd lost access to their grandkids too. Sarah's last Instagram post before deleting her account was a long rant about how they were leaving toxic energy behind and starting fresh where their dreams could flourish. She tagged it as being in Miami, but knowing Sarah, that's probably just another lie. Here's where it gets really sad though. My parents finally hit rock bottom. Dad's back got so bad he couldn't even get out of bed some days, and their health insurance lapsed because they couldn't afford the premiums. Mom had to pick up extra tutoring jobs after school just to keep the lights on. They were surviving on ramen noodles and whatever Mrs. Peterson accidentally made too much of for dinner. Then came the day I'd been both dreading and expecting. Mom showed up at my condo, looking about 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her. She broke down completely. Not the manipulative crying I'd gotten used to, but real, raw, broken sobs. For the first time, she actually apologized. Not just a quick sorry, but a real acknowledgement of how badly they'd screwed up by enabling Jake his whole life and taking my support for granted. Dad was harder to crack, but even he finally admitted they'd been wrong. The final straw for him was finding out Jake had stolen his prized fishing gear, the last thing he had from his own father, and probably sold it for cash before they disappeared. So here's where we are now. I've started helping my parents again, but with very clear boundaries this time. They've agreed to financial counseling. It's a condition of my help, and they're finally starting to understand how their enabling behavior contributed to this whole mess. I'm not paying all their bills like before, but I am making sure they have food and can afford their medications. As for Jake and Sarah, they've completely vanished, changed their numbers, deleted all social media, though Sarah did try to start a new Instagram account under a different name. I found it because she still used the same old hashtags like Matcha Blessed and Matcha Living My Best Life. The police said that since my parents willingly gave them the money, there's not much they can do. The only update we got was a postcard, no return address, with a picture of palm trees and the message, "Kids are doing great, living our dream. Don't try to contact us. We're done with the negative energy. P.S. Sorry about the credit card, we needed it for gas money." The postmark said Orlando, but who knows if that's really where they are. Mom asked me the other day if I think Jake will ever come back. I told her the truth. Probably only when he needs money again. But this time, I know we'll all be strong enough to say no. Edit. To everyone asking, yes, I changed all my banking passwords and put a freeze on my credit. Trust issues? Me? Whatever gave you that idea. Edit 2. A lot of people are asking about Mrs. Peterson. She's still an absolute angel and has basically adopted my parents. She brings them dinner twice a week and has a standing movie night with my mom. Sometimes the best family is the one you choose. Final update. Just found out Sarah started a TikTok account trying to sell some sketchy crypto scheme. Guess some people never change. Shrug,